When I was 17 years old, I told my parents that instead of going to university, I was going to go to South Sudan. After about a year of arguing back and forth, we finally decided that if I found a charity group to go with, I could go. I contacted about 20 different charity groups and organizations, and they all told me the same thing. They said, "You're too young, you don't have the right skills. Contact us after you finish university." But one guy told me something very different, and that was Deng Jongkuch. I met him at a peace rally in San Francisco. When Deng was 5 years old, he walked over 1,000 miles and ended up in a refugee camp. And I ended up going with him to South Sudan 2 days after I graduated from high school at 18 years old. He told me, "You don't always need a specific skill to make a difference in this world, just a heart. You don't always need a specific skill, just a heart, and you can learn those skills as you go in life." Although those organizations were right, I did not have any specific skills. I was able to learn the stories and meet the people. One of the people I met was this 3-year-old boy, Maru. He was bit by a scorpion on the bottom of his foot, and he was fading in and out of consciousness. I contacted a doctor in my hometown in California, and the doctor told me the nearest anti-venom, the nearest medicine, was in the country of Uganda, and that it was a 50% chance he survives, 50% chance he dies. And that's when I realized that it's just chance where we're born in this world. That we could have been born in Maru's shoes, and Maru could have been born in our shoes. Luckily, Maru survived, but I think my heart grew for others at that moment, and I wanted to live a life of service for others. I promised my parents that I would go to university after living in South Sudan, and I started studying international relations in Los Angeles. The first Syrian I ever met was my Arabic teacher, Iman Hashim. And one day after class, I went to her office to get extra help, and she was crying. And I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that 2 of her cousins were killed as they were helping their neighbor in Syria. And it made me just want to do something. And I would go around to my friends and family and say, "We need to do something." And then I realized maybe I needed to do something. And so I remembered what Deng Jongkuch told me, that sometimes you don't always need a specific skill to make a difference in this world, just a heart. And my heart was torn about what was happening. So I ended up taking a gap semester to the country of Jordan, where a lot of the Syrian refugees were moving to. When I got there, I went to the UN headquarters, and I found out that the only way I could get into the camp was as a journalist or working for a UN organization, and neither applied to me. I did not have any journalist credentials, but I decided I would be a student journalist, there to learn the stories and meet the people. One of the people I met was a mother of 3, and I asked her what she wanted to tell the world. And she looked at me and said, "To know that I could be your mom." And then she turned to her 2 daughters, 11 and 8 years old, and they were waving at me. And she said, "To know that those could be your sisters." And then she turned to her son, about 5 years old, and she said, "To know that that could be your brother, that there's no differences between us in this world." And it also made me think about Maru in South Sudan, and how part of life is always based off of chance and where we're born. And that really motivated me to want to do something. I kept going around the refugee camp asking the Syrian people, "What do you need the most?" And one of their biggest responses was better housing. They were living in tents at the time. And so my friend Olivia and I fundraised for 2 caravans. They're basically box houses to get the refugees out of these tents. And we did all the paperwork. We got these 2 caravans to the entrance of the camp. This is along the Syria-Jordan border, about 10 kilometers from Syria. And they said, no, you can't. The camp official said, no, they can't enter. But I thought, there's got to be an exception to rules. And I actually thought of when I was trying out for the varsity basketball team when I was in high school, and the basketball coach said, there's going to be no underclassmen, no 9th or 10th graders. So all the other 9th and 10th graders left. But I stayed at the meeting, even though I was in 10th grade. And he looked at me and he said, no underclassmen can make the team. And I said, I'm going to try out anyways. 2 weeks later, I ended up making the team, and I got to play basketball with my brother. And I thought of that story when I was at the entrance to the camp. And so I stayed at the entrance to the camp, and I thought maybe they'll see my commitment. And so after hours and hours at the entrance to the camp, they finally let our caravans in. And it just reminds me that sometimes we have to be a little naive to change the world. After fundraising for these 2 caravans, a group of students in New York heard about our caravan deliveries, and they also fundraised for a caravan. Then another group of students heard about what that high school was doing, and they also fundraised for a caravan. And so I took their money and delivered it for 2 more caravans inside the refugee camp. But someone who works in the refugee camp, he told me that delivering these 2 caravans is like putting a drop in the ocean. It's like putting 1 drop in a big bucket. And I can see why he said that when you look at the size of the refugee camp. At one point, there were more than 130,000 people in this camp. But then I look at the picture of Munir. He's a 14-year-old boy that was shot in the leg as he was walking from his house to a bakery in southern Syria. And because these students fundraised money for these 2 caravans, he now has a new home. And because of that caravan, they were able to get out of the refugee camp and get a little bit better life. And it just reminds me that if we start somewhere small, we really can make a difference in this world. After these caravan deliveries, I wanted to change foreign policy on Syria. And I did a master's degree in international relations, but I wanted to do something more. And I had applied 7 times to intern with President Obama, and I had failed every single time. Before I share that, though, I have to share a quick story. After these caravan deliveries, I got an email from the UN, and this was the email, and it said, every single family in this refugee camp now has a caravan. And I really couldn't believe it, that it went from all tents in this camp of 100,000 people to caravans. And we'll never know if it was because of these students that gave 2 caravans, but I do know that we have ripple effects in this world, and we can set the precedent for what should happen in this world, even if we're just students. And so I wanted to change foreign policy, and I had applied 7 times to intern with President Obama. That's a screenshot of all the times I applied. I tried one time with a different username. That didn't work. I can't remember that username. But I decided I would apply an 8th time. And on the 8th try, I ended up getting in and interning with Mrs. Obama for the last 4 months of President Obama's administration. And I led the intern class on foreign policy and international affairs, and I was able to meet with President Obama's advisor on Syria and share some of these first-hand testimonies from the refugee camp. Yes, he had the intelligence reports, but I wanted him to also have the stories of that mother in the refugee camp that said, it's just chance where we're born, that this is also part of your family. And so I share this because I really think one of the best ways to make a difference in this world is to first put others first, and find out how we can be persistent and lead with our hearts. Thank you very much.